Hey, and welcome back to the Gender and Friendship Podcast. Today we'll be talking about gender vulnerability and the friendship gap. Katie, what's something that most people don't know about gender vulnerability and the friendship gap?
That's a great question, Kayla. So, just starting out, we found that women are more or significantly more likely than men to seek emotional support from their friends and to communicate more frequently, while men report just similar levels of loneliness overall. So, this is kind of just showing that regardless of who you are, um, you're able to experience loneliness, but women are more open emotionally, and this shows vulnerability. So, why would this be important for our listeners? What do you think, Kayla?
Yeah, well, I think this brings up the complexity of friendship and vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Here we have a statistic talking about how women are more likely to open up, and later in this episode we'll talk about the value of vulnerability. That being said, even though women are shown to be more vulnerable, men and women express similar levels of loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we go into this podcast episode, I think it's important to really look into the role of vulnerability, but also what is it about maybe male to male relationships that also offsets loneliness, and what can
Mm-hmm.
we learn from male to male relationships, female to female relationships, and male to female
Yeah.
relationships as far as how to combat loneliness and where vulnerability plays a role in
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right that men and women have a lot to learn from each other on what can lead to um, condensing that friendship gap. And so we, before this episode, we conducted a survey, which allowed for us to kind of more fully understand on a smaller scale the realities that people faced when opening up emotionally or having vulnerability their within their friend groups, what those friend groups looked like. And so, Michaela, what are some things that were interesting to you from that survey?
Man, I know. So when we talked about this a little bit before recording, Katie and I were both surprised at the statistics that came up from the free responses
Mm-hmm.
in response to, like, if yes, what stops you from opening up? As mentioned in the previous episode, that survey question of what stops people from opening up. 17% of people said nothing. That was the second largest category. The largest category of responses, 24% of responders said they didn't want to be a burden.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we saw that, I remember we just sat there for a little bit because it's just really sad to hear that. And, um, you know, that's, I think that's a real thing that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be talked about.
Yeah, definitely a stark reality. And so we hope that from the survey and it can kind of show the reality of what people face when it comes to opening up. And so we wanted to talk a little bit more of what this looks like, what is called self-disclosure. And so before we conducted our survey, we kind of dove more in depth of what really defines self-disclosure. So it is revealing kind of prohibited thoughts and experience that deepen connection through friendship. And so this can look like a lot of different things, and vulnerability looks different for each person. For men, they can be limited with a something called hegemonic masculinity, which is a term that denotes stoicism or dominance or independence. And so this may be a more of a stereotype than anything, but this may be something that may be befriending specifically, or even more generally, the male population that prevents them from opening up and being face to face in combating loneliness. And so, compared to men, women are statistically more likely to self disclose through emotional intimacy and supportive communication. And so, what would that look like for you? And from what your experience, Michaela, what would self disclosure look like for even our listeners in their lives?
Yeah, I think it can take a lot of different forms. Um, I you know I think it can be that's a really good question, right? I think it really depends on who you are and how you're used to communicating. But I think, my mom says like one of the best ways to get over an emotion is just by acknowledging it. So, whether that's being like, man, today was really tough, or like, going into more depth than that and more detail. I think any form of just like acknowledging, today wasn't the best day, like that in and of itself is a form of self-disclosure.
Yeah, that's a really good example. I also found, I think it's so interesting from our survey that this can be experienced by anyone, and being open about their emotions, regardless of the gender of friendship that they're experiencing, is so important. This is also an interesting thing that really struck me, was that male friendships center on shared activities and loyalty. So that is an amazing quality that men and women can emphasize more in being in self-disclosure, and just being present, having fun with those around you. And I know that that looks differently for each person, but what would that look like for you, and having that shared activity?
Yeah, I think just knowing that someone's down to plan and show up for an activity you're both excited to do automatically sets you up for at least some form of relation, like success and connecting. um I I think, in our survey, one of the questions that we asked was about loneliness, and or how let's see, one of the questions we asked in our survey was about um, we asked, have you ever chosen not to share emotions or experiences with friends because of their gender? And 32% said yes, 39% said sometimes. And while we don't know if that was like males or females, I wonder if there's a way that we could normalize opening up. I think there's something to be said for being willing to show up for someone physically.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about this in the previous episode, showing up for someone emotionally. So, having those shared activities, those planned activities to do fun things, but also being willing to get on someone's level, and being willing to tell them if your day hasn't been good. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I think I wonder if there's a way we could normalize that. Why do you think that people sometimes shy away from opening up to people based on their gender?
I don't know if we have a perfect answer for that, but there may be something about gender stereotypes and how we assume that the opposite gender may react, because I think that is an important part of our survey, that people may feel limited based on the gender of those that they're opening up to or not opening up to. One thing that I thought was interesting is that modern male friendships are declining, and this may be because of the likelihood of higher likelihood of men experience homophobia, and this may weaken friendship quality and increase loneliness, like you said. And so, specifically in a male population, I don't know if I can speak for them, but I think that anything that we can do to exemplify that, to speak openly, regardless of the gender of those that we're with, and be accepting of any gender, would hopefully safeguard against those feelings and lessen likelihood of opening up.
Yeah, I've been having this experience come to mind a few times, but I have awesome coworkers in both of my jobs, and there was one day where it like just wasn't my favorite day, and one of my coworkers asked me how my day was, and like literally all I said was like, it's been all right. But I think just having someone take the time to ask, and like literally it was like a 1 minute interaction, but for that 1 minute I had their attention, and I felt seen, I felt heard. I didn't feel like I had to be super vulnerable, but I knew that they could tell that maybe it wasn't the best day for me, and just in them asking, that meant a lot. I have other coworkers who, who are really good at just stopping what they're doing and like looking at me and being like, Michaela, how are you? And it's not like, I think tying this back to like Jesus Christ, right? Like Christ, like I think part of Christ like love is just stopping in the moment, like giving 100% of your attention to someone, like whether it's someone of the same gender or someone of the other gender, and just asking how they are,
Yeah.
and then it's up to them how they answer. But I think just in being asked, that shows that opens someone up for a connection. I love the responses from the question, what do you think contributes most to feeling connected or disconnected in friendships? And one of the responses was just shared laughter.
That's so sweet. Yeah. It's great to know that like simple things like asking questions or humor can
Yeah.
make all the difference in vulnerability. And I know from like personally, I think people communicate differently, but one way that I feel connected to someone is through a shared joke or a good laugh. And I think I love that you noted the findings from the survey because it was so interesting. There's so many different responses to that one question,
Yeah.
and even questions of what makes a friendship meaningful to you or what makes you feel connected in friendships.
There's a lot of variability.
Uh-huh.
I think another response to the feeling connected or disconnected was how invested they are in reaching out to me specifically and remembering things about me and what I've said. That same coworker I initially talked about, like, we don't have like super deep or emotional conversations, right?
Yeah.
But when we're, sometimes just out of the blue, he'll be like, how's your project coming? I'm like, oh, you remembered I had a project, like, oh, that's nice. Thanks, And I'd also, there have been times with other coworkers where I've asked them how they're doing, right? And maybe they don't tell me word for word, like, oh, it's been tough, but it helped me feel appreciated as a friend when they opened up to me. Like the example I'm thinking of with this coworker is I said, hey, it seems like school's been a lot for you lately. He was like, yeah, it's been busy. And then he said, like, thanks for asking. And he was like, there's just been a lot going on between work and school. And I think our dialogue was a perfectly fine example of how you can share appropriate levels of vulnerability in, platonic friendships, right? And I mean, I can't speak to the male to male relationship and like fear of homophobia in that regard, but I can speak to the friendships I have with my male friends, male to female relationships.
That's such a powerful example. And so I know that this looks differently for everyone, like we've seen from our research. We hope that we can give general takeaways and application for what we've talked about today when it comes to being vulnerable in your gender and in your friendships. And so we've kind of talked a little bit today about asking questions, being curious about those around us. Generally, we recommend that we can normalize vulnerability and challenge any stereotypes, regardless of being male or female. And in light of that, we can create opportunities, just like you mentioned, Michaela, of having those deeper conversations and asking how your day is or how are you doing.
Or, I would add even just creating space for feedback, like, I think normalizing vulnerability there. This other point, I guess the reason I tied in like the response of shared laughter is I definitely feel like it's easier to relax with people when we've acknowledged that we're there for the other person. And so in asking how someone's doing, even if we respond with like it's been a little bit tough, then I feel like in that moment, you're seen. And then I think it's a little bit easier to move on from the fact that the day's been hard and kick back and relax a little bit more and laugh about the things that are going well. And so, I think normalizing like a healthy level of vulnerability and openness is one of the best takeaways from this episode.
Yeah. And we know that there are so many benefits to vulnerability, to being open. But generally, we hope that our research or recommendations can help you know and others come to realize that we can move past any negative stereotypes of friendship, of vulnerability, regardless of our gender, and that will benefit us and those that we interact with, and bringing that laughter, and
Yeah.
that openness to everyone that we interact with.
Yeah. So moving forward, we would encourage ourselves and listeners to practice proactive communication, being willing to see the people around you for, the children of God that they are, and taking time to see them in that moment, and read the room. Ask them,
Yes.
not be afraid to ask them how they're doing, and I think that, as we normalize, seeing each other in the moment, and taking each other where we're at emotionally, and being willing to meet them at their level, whether that's at the shared laughter level, or acknowledging that life has been hard and then sharing laughter. I think that that vulnerability will build stronger relationships, offset loneliness, improve mental health, and break the norms that, maybe hold us back from opening up to each other.
Yeah. So altogether, we can find a balance between vulnerability, being emotionally open, and having those shared activities like laughter. And so, if you enjoyed this podcast, we recommend that you take a few classes that we've been able to take at BYU that have been helpful for us.
Yeah, we mentioned in the previous podcast a couple of those classes, but just for a rerun, the classes that we're in that have taught us more about these subjects are Gender Development in Families, taught by Adam Rogers, SFL 356, and then another really good one is Intro to Family Processes, SFL 160, taught by Brian Willoughby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We'd also like to share that if you are in any way feeling experiencing any form of loneliness or mental health struggles, if you're struggling to open up to those around you, then we know that a powerful resource on BYU campus is the Counseling and Psychological Services, and they have a lot of different options for counseling and for ways for you to be open with someone if you're needing that.
Yeah, CAPS is a great resource. I think counseling is awesome, and can teach anyone great skills for approaching emotions, and even being willing to and even learning how to express vulnerability. Mm-hmm. Another plug I'd make is just being willing to get involved in your wards, clubs, nights, events on campus, or even just trying to get to know the person who's sitting next to you in class. Yeah.
Yeah, using the people and the resources around us, because that is what helps us create social support and be emotionally open. And so we hope that this podcast has given you a way to move forward and use any of those resources if necessary. And we hope you've enjoyed listening.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.